Why Jesus and Buddha can't save you, the radical truth about salvation. Not that Buddha saves you, not that Jesus saves you. Nobody can save anybody. Only you can save yourself. People go on saying that someone is the salvation, but that misses the point, because if salvation were something given from outside, then why is the world still in misery? A great teacher has happened, yet he would not solve everybody's problems by doing the work for them. He has not solved anybody's problems, not even the problems of his own followers, not because he cannot teach, but because nobody can do it in your place. Nobody can do it, and it is good that nobody can do it, because if others can do it, then they can undo it too. And if your freedom can be given by others, it won't be much of a freedom. It will be another kind of bondage. Freedom has to be achieved by your own efforts. Nobody can give it to you. Hence, nobody can take it away from you. It is absolutely yours, as your own training, your own path, your own release. Through the ages, great teachers like Jesus and Buddha have accepted to come and help humanity. If life is no more than a joke, why do they take the trouble? Because living beings suffer, and compassion moves a wise person to point out a way. That too is part of this great play of causes and conditions. Buddha and Christ, they are part of this great unfolding. Don't take them in a way that makes you heavy and sad. Don't take it sadly. Let the heart be light. When I say it is all a joke, I simply mean don't take it with despair. Don't take it with a long, burdened face. Let there be a brightness in practice. Nobody is a savior, neither Buddha nor Jesus. Nobody is a savior. I am included in it. Nobody is a savior. Then what is a Buddha? A Buddha is just a salvation, not a savior, but a release shown and made possible. If you understand him, if you look into him, if you partake of his Dhamma, your life is no longer a misery. It is a bliss, not by belief, but by abandoning the causes of suffering. Not that Buddha saves you, not that Jesus saves you. Nobody can save anybody. Only you can save yourself. But they are salvations in the sense that they show the way. And the secret of salvation is, be joyful, don't be sad. The secret of salvation is, don't go on creating misery. And the serious face, the long face, is the unreligious face, because it forgets the possibility of release here and now. Be playful in the sense of not clinging, and in that non-clinging is your salvation. And it is you and only you who can save yourself. I can make my heart available to you. I'm not a savior, I am a salvation, a friend in the Dhamma, pointing you back to your own work. You can't eat the Buddha. When you come across a situation where a friend is in pain or suffering, in mental distress, and you can help the friend overcome the pain, get over the distress, it gives rise to a very good feeling in the heart. The problem is that there are other times when we're with other people who are in pain, and we can't reach them. This is especially true around issues of birth, illness, and death. Sometimes you have a newborn child and the child is crying and crying and crying. No matter what you do, the child won't stop. It seems hard to believe that there can be so much pain and anguish in such a little tiny body, but there it is. And you can't reach the child. Or when someone is very ill and demented, you often can't reach that person. They're in their own private world, suffering their own private pains and torments. And especially at death, there comes a point where even before the actual moment of death, you realize that the person is beyond you. You can't reach in and help, no matter how much you might want to. That's when you realize the extent to which pain is a very private matter, the extent to which anguish and suffering are private matters. We'd like to think that we can help one another through these things, but there's a lot that each person can do only for him or herself. Even the Buddha couldn't save other people. There were many people he couldn't even teach. He taught only those who could be taught, In other words, those who were willing to take responsibility for their own sufferings. The pain of aging, illness, and death is one of the first topics the Buddha brings up in his first sermon, which we chanted just now. And he says that our suffering doesn't come from a lack of help from other people. It comes from our own lack of skill inside. Our knowledge isn't skillful, our desires aren't skillful. And this is something that only we can take care of ourselves, because no one can teach another person to be skillful. You can teach people how they might try to train themselves to be skillful, but you can't take your skill and put it in somebody else's head or hands. They have to learn how to observe from within what kind of thinking is skillful, what kind of acting, what kind of speaking is skillful, and what kind is not. If they find themselves engaged in unskillful habits, they've got to learn how to overcome those habits and replace them with more skillful habits. We can't do this for one another. It's a personal, individual matter. This is why the Buddha taught the way he did. He had developed the skill, and he explained to other people how they could develop the skill as well. He acted as an example, he showed the way, but that was as far as he could go. From that point on, it was up to the people he taught to develop the skill on their own. Someone once asked the Buddha why some people, when he taught them, got the results and gained awakening, while other people didn't. Was there something wrong with his teaching? Was he playing favorites, giving the right teaching to some and not to others? The Buddha responded, "Have you ever given directions to someone on how to follow the road to Rajagaha from Nalanda?" The man said, "Yes." "And did everybody get there?" "Well, some people didn't follow my instructions," the man said. "They went astray." "Was it your fault that they went astray?" The man said, "No, I gave the same instructions to everybody." And the Buddha said it was the same in his case. He gave the right instructions to everyone. Some people followed them, some people didn't, but it was beyond his power to force them to. In this way, the Buddha keeps throwing the practice back at us. It's up to us to deal with our own lack of skill, to figure out where our thoughts are unskillful, where our attitudes are unskillful, where the way we look at things is unskillful, and then make a change. He wants us to make ourselves skillful. He wants us to make ourselves strong. The most common image at the front of every Buddhist meditation hall is of the Buddha sitting there meditating. He's not nailed to a cross. He doesn't offer himself as food. Basically, he's showing us, this is how you learn how to feed yourselves so that you eventually reach the point where you don't need to feed anymore. You develop internal strengths, conviction, persistence, mindfulness, concentration, and discernment. These are qualities we all have to some extent, but we've got to learn how to strengthen them, and they in turn make the mind stronger. So our food here isn't bread and wine. Our food is concentration. The Buddha compared the different levels of concentration to different types of food. The first jhana, he said, is like grass and water. As you work up through the other jhanas, you get rice, beans, and finally honey, sugar, and ghee. These are our foods on the path. They're foods we have to learn how to fix within ourselves. We have to become our own cooks. The ingredients are all here. It's simply a matter of putting them together and learning how to nourish ourselves with them. So, instead of promising us an unending source of food from outside, he's teaching us how to feed from within, strengthening the mind ultimately to a point where it doesn't need to feed anymore. When you're in that position, you're not the only one who benefits. The people around you benefit as well. You're no longer forcing them to provide you with the food you want. I remember once hearing a Dhamma teacher saying he didn't want to live in a world where there was no suffering because he wouldn't be able to exercise his compassion. He apparently didn't stop to think of what a selfish attitude that is. You want the gratification that comes from exercising your compassion, so you need other people who suffer. What kind of compassion is that? Ideally, you should want a world where no one is suffering, where, as we chant every night, they can look after themselves with ease. And the only way to do that is to teach people how to fix their own food, and learn to be more skillful inside. Some people will want to comply and some people won't. That's where you have to develop equanimity. You don't grasp onto them saying, "Please stay here and suffer so I can feel good about being compassionate." That's just another way of saying, "Even though it hurts you to stay, please be here for me when I need you." The Buddha's final nibbana was the opposite of that, and it was an amazing act of kindness. He showed us that the best thing a person can do is to find true happiness within and then get out of the food chain. That's the example he left for us. In effect, he was showing that your pursuit of true happiness is not something to be ashamed of. It's not a lowly or a childish or a hedonistic pursuit. It's something noble, because the pursuit of true happiness is not a grasping kind of pursuit. It involves developing qualities of wisdom, purity, compassion, the wisdom to realize that you're going to have to depend on yourself for your happiness, and that the happiness that's worth working toward is a long-term happiness, not a short-term. From that realization grows compassion, the understanding that other people want happiness too, and if your happiness depends on their suffering, they're not going to let your happiness be long-term. They're going to try to cut it short. So if you want a long-term happiness, you can't harm other people. And then purity comes from actually looking at your actions, your thoughts, your words, and your deeds, to see where your action cause harm either for yourself or for others, and then learning how to avoid that harm. So the pursuit of happiness, if you conduct it properly, leads to noble qualities in the mind. That way, you become a refuge, both for yourself and for others. You join the noble Sangha and become a refuge to other people in the sense that you become an example to them as well, so they can learn how to feed and strengthen themselves. This is how the Dhamma is passed on. So even though our pursuit may be for something very private and individual, the way we pursue this happiness, this skill that enables us not to suffer even through illness or death, we take care of a part of ourselves that no one else can reach. If we don't take care of this, what do? We thrash around, placing burdens on other people and leaving them miserable because they see ultimately that they can't help our suffering either, deep down inside. But if you learn how to take care of that part inside you, you've taken care of your responsibility, and then whatever gifts you have for other people, you can offer them freely. They're not offered in exchange for, "You take care of me and I'll take care of you." The attitude is, "Here, look, take this. I don't need it anymore." That's a very different kind of relationship. It doesn't come with a quid pro quo of, "Okay, I'll be nice to you and you'll be nice to me." It's simply, "Here, take." But the Buddha goes beyond even the "here, take, this is my body offered to you." He says, "Come and look. This is how you can learn how to feed yourself from within, how you can learn how to grow strong so that ultimately you don't need to feed anymore." It's probably the greatest gift there is. The desire for awakening. When the Buddha lists the various forms of suffering under the first noble truth, one of them is not getting what is wanted. If you read just that much, and you remember that the Buddha also said that craving is the cause of suffering, you might think that the cure for that form of suffering is simply not to want anything. When you don't want anything, you won't be disappointed when you don't get anything. You won't suffer. It's from this line of reasoning that people have drawn the conclusion that if the key to the goal of not suffering is not to want anything, then the path there should also involve not wanting anything either. From that, it follows that a path of not wanting would have to be a path of not doing, and to be truly not doing anything, you can't assume that you're doing the path, or that there's even anyone there to do the path to begin with. The path simply unfolds as you get yourself out of the way. But if you read the Buddha's explanation of what he means by not getting what is wanted, And if you view that explanation in light of his own quest for awakening, you realize that the path to ending that form of suffering is more subtle and strategic. It involves wanting and doing, and you have to take responsibility for making sure it gets done. He explains not getting what is wanted like this. And what is the stress of not getting what is wanted? In being subject to birth, the wish arises, "Oh, may we not be subject to birth, and may birth not come to us." But this is not to be achieved by wishing. This is the stress of not getting what is wanted. In being subject to aging, illness, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair, the wish arises, "Oh, may we not be subject to aging, illness, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair, and may aging, illness, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair not come to us." But this is not to be achieved by wishing. This is the stress of not getting what is wanted. DN 22. This explanation complicates the picture because the desire not to be subject to birth, aging, illness, death, and all the rest was precisely the desire that motivated the Bodhisattva, the Buddha, to be in his search for awakening. I too, monks, before my self-awakening, when I was still just an unawakened Bodhisattva, the thought occurred to me, why do I, being subject myself to birth, seek what is likewise subject to birth? Being subject myself to aging, illness, death, sorrow, defilement, why do I seek what is likewise subject to aging, illness, death, sorrow, defilement? What if I, being subject myself to birth, seeing the drawbacks of birth, were to seek the unborn, unexcelled rest from the yoke, unbinding? What if I, being subject myself to aging, illness, death, sorrow, defilement, seeing the drawbacks of aging, illness, death, sorrow, defilement, were to seek the aging, less, illnessless, deathless, sorrowless, undefiled, unexcelled rest from the yoke, unbinding? MN 26. The desire that motivated him to search for awakening differed from the more generic desire to put an end to aging, etc., in that he recognized that the ending of the more everyday forms of not getting what you want, such as freedom from sorrow, lamentation, and despair, required something radical, total freedom from birth and death. That, in turn, would require a dedicated search. He called that search the noble search, in contrast to the ignoble search that looked for happiness in things subject to birth, aging, illness, and death, such as relationships and possessions. MN 26. Now, it wasn't the case that his desire to go beyond birth, etc., was limited to just the beginning of his path. His continued desire to find the deathless explains why he wasn't satisfied with the first two knowledges on the night of his awakening. Knowing his previous lives, and knowing how beings throughout the cosmos die and are reborn in line with their actions. Only when he found the deathless through the third knowledge, knowing that he had mastered the duties of the Four Noble Truths, did he end his search. Then, monks, being subject myself to birth, seeing the drawbacks of birth, seeking the unborn, unexcelled rest from the yoke, unbinding, I reached the unborn, unexcelled rest from the yoke, unbinding, being subject myself to aging, illness, death, sorrow, defilement, seeing the drawbacks of aging, illness, death, sorrow, defilement, seeking the aging, less, illnessless, deathless, sorrowless, undefiled, unexcelled rest from the yoke, unbinding. I reach the agingless, illnessless, deathless, sorrowless, undefiled, unexcelled rest from the yoke, unbinding. Knowledge and vision arose in me. Unprovoked is my release. This is the last birth. There is now no further becoming. MN 26. He then taught his students to give rise to the same desire for the deathless and, rather than simply wishing for the deathless or abandoning that desire and resting content with things subject to death, to focus their desires on the path to the deathless and to follow through with it until they had reached the goal. This is why the Buddha noted that one of the secrets to his awakening was discontent with skillful qualities. AN 215. As he described his quest for awakening, when he followed a path of practice and found that it didn't lead all the way to the deathless, he abandoned it in search of what is skillful. MN 36. He kept trying to raise the level of his skill until it yielded the results he wanted. Only when he reached the deathless was he content. He illustrated this principle with an analogy. If a person has need of the heartwood of a tree, he shouldn't content himself with the leaves and twigs, the bark, or the sapwood. He has to keep searching until he finds the heartwood that will serve his purposes. MN 29. So, the desire for the deathless is not the problem. The problem is in wanting to attain the deathless simply through wishing it to be so. This is why the Buddha taught that the duty with regard to suffering is not to abandon the desire for the deathless, but to comprehend it. When you comprehend the problem, you'll comprehend the solution, and you can focus your desires there. The Buddha makes this point in more abstract terms in an interesting variant on dependent co-arising, his list of the causes that lead to suffering and stress. Most versions of the list end with suffering, but one version takes suffering as the jumping-off point for a series of factors, beginning with conviction. When you comprehend the suffering of not getting what you want and can actually pinpoint the problem, that's your motivation for placing conviction in the Buddha's path and desiring to follow it. When you do, you give rise to joy, to the rapture, pleasure, and calm of concentration, and to the discernment that inspires dispassion, leading to total release. SN 1223. When you focus your desires on following the right path of action, you'll get what you want. Then, Ananda used an analogy to illustrate the role of desire on the path and in attaining the goal. Once, when he was staying in a park, a Brahmin came and asked him what the goal of his practice was. Ananda replied that the goal was to abandon desire. The Brahmin then asked whether there was a path of practice leading to the abandoning of desire, and Ananda replied that there was. He then described the path in terms of a teaching called the Four Bases of Power, mental power endowed with concentration based on one of four things: desire, persistence, intent, and analysis, along with the fabrications of exertion or right effort. The Brahmin then replied that the path would have to be an endless path, because there's no way you could abandon desire by means of desire. Ananda responded with his analogy. Before the Brahmin came to the park, didn't he have a desire to come? Didn't he make an effort to act on that desire? And when he arrived, wasn't that desire, along with the effort, allayed? The Brahmin admitted that that was the case. In the same way, Ananda continued, when a person has attained total awakening, whatever desire he or she had for awakening, whatever effort he or she made for awakening, is allayed. SN 5115. What he implies here is that you need desire to get on the path and stick with it to the end. And as he also implies, it's not the case that, in the higher stages of the path, you attain the goal by abandoning the desire to get there. You abandon the desire because you've arrived. Now, the path and the goal are two different things. The goal is unfabricated, which means that it doesn't depend on any conditions. It's not something you do. The path, though, is fabricated. It doesn't cause the unfabricated, but the act of following the path can take you there. And it is a path of doing. The important thing is that you do it right. You can't clone awakening by abandoning all efforts in imitation of what you've read about the goal. We can illustrate this point with another of the Buddha's analogies. Suppose you want milk from a cow. If you try to get it by twisting the cow's horn, you won't get any milk no matter how much you want it. But if you pull the udder, you'll get the milk. MN 126. All too many people try getting milk by twisting the horn, and then, when they don't get any, they stop twisting the horn. They notice that not twisting the horn is more peaceful than twisting it, so they decide that peace is to be found, not by doing anything to the cow, but by embracing your innate cow awareness. They even suggest that that's what the Buddha meant by milk. Now, cow awareness may bring you peace and relief after years of twisting the horn, but it still leaves you thirsty because it's no way to get any milk. It would be a shame to content yourself with being thirsty, because the milk is still potentially available. What you have to realize is that you originally took the wrong approach, and that you'll have to make the effort to find the right approach. Even though the act of pulling the udder is very different from the act of drinking milk, and it's not as peaceful as simply being aware of the cow, still, when you pull the udder, you'll get the milk. You can end your thirst. That's why it's the right approach. As the Buddha says in that sutta, the right approach to awakening is the Noble Eightfold Path. And as he states in a famous verse from the Dhammapada, it's up to you to follow the path. Just this is the path. There is no other. To purify vision, follow it, and that will be Mara's bewilderment. It's for you to strive ardently. Tathagatas simply point out the way. Those who practice, absorbed in jhana, from Mara's bonds, they'll be freed. DHP 274-276. Here the Buddha's not simply taking poetic license and saying that it's for you to strive. Again and again, throughout the canon, when he describes how you should talk to yourself as you take on different aspects of the path, he advises you to use your sense of I to emphasize the fact that you're making the choice to practice properly, and you're going to have to accept responsibility for carrying through with that choice. Even though you'll eventually need to abandon the sense of I am as you approach the final stages of the path, just as you'll have to abandon desire and striving. You won't arrive at those final stages unless you first put that I am to good use all along the way. Only then, when the time comes, can you abandon it in a way that's healthy and effective. The Buddha himself, when describing his quest for awakening, said again and again in effect that I did this, quite secluded from sensuality, secluded from unskillful qualities. I entered and remained in the first jhana. With the abandoning of pleasure and pain, I entered and remained in the fourth jhana. When the mind was thus concentrated, I directed it to the knowledge of the ending of the mental effluence. MN 36. A prime example of how he taught the skillful use of I to others is found in his instructions to his son, Rahula, when Rahula was still a young boy. The Buddha tells him to reflect on his actions before doing them, while doing them, and after they're done, to make sure that he doesn't intend any harm and that his actions actually succeed in avoiding harm. In each case, the reflection involves taking responsibility for his actions. This action I want to do. This action I am doing. This action I have done. Only when Rahula takes responsibility for his actions in this way can he purify them. This, the Buddha says, is how all those in the past, present, and future who purify their actions have acted, are acting, and will act. And this skillful use of I applies not only on the beginning levels of the practice, but also on more advanced stages. Here, for instance, is how the Buddha recommends making mindfulness the governing principle with regard to developing discernment and releasing the mind. And how is mindfulness the governing principle? The mindfulness that I will scrutinize with discernment any Dhamma that is not yet scrutinized, or I will protect with discernment any Dhamma that has been scrutinized, is well established right within. The mindfulness that I will touch through, release any Dhamma that is not yet touched, or I will protect with discernment any Dhamma that has been touched, is well established right within. This is how mindfulness is the governing principle. And 4245. This is how he recommended that Ananda aim at attaining the highest form of emptiness. Therefore, Ananda, you should train yourselves. We will enter and remain in the emptiness that is pure, superior, and unsurpassed. MN 121. We. These terms have their skillful uses. They remind you that you have to take responsibility for the path. No one else and nothing else can do it for you. If you try to throw away all notions of desire, striving, and your role in doing the path won't get done. Only when it's done can you safely put these notions aside. You may have heard of the simile of the raft. To get to the further shore, you use twigs, branches, and vines you find on this shore to put together a raft. This stands for the fact that the raft has to be made of things, like desire and your sense of I, found in the unawakened mind, and you have to put them together skillfully. You can't just dump them in the river and hope that they'll carry you across. Once you've made the raft then, holding on to it and making an effort with your hands and feet, you swim over to the other shore. At that point, you can put the raft down and go on your way. But you don't put it down until it's done its job, and you do put it down with a sense of appreciation. How useful this raft has been to me. For it was in dependence on this raft that, making an effort with my hands and feet, I have crossed over to safety on the further shore. MN 22. In the same way, you don't put aside your desire for awakening or your sense of yourself as responsible for the path until the path has done its job. And when you put them down skillfully, you'll do it with an appreciative sense of the good they have done. Inner refuge through inner strength. When we were in Brazil, someone asked why sitting along with a guided meditation got much better results than sitting there meditating on your own, even in a group, in the presence of the teacher. My answer was basically that the person giving the guided meditation is doing a lot of your work for you. In other words, the instructions are doing what your mindfulness should be doing. That's why, although it may be useful to have a couple of guided meditations every now and then, there comes a point where you have to do the work yourself. Nobody else can make you mindful. No one can make you awaken. Someone once asked the Buddha, "Please remove my doubts." And the Buddha said, "I can't remove anybody's doubts. You have to remove your own doubts." So we've got the instructions, and it's up to you to remember the instructions and to carry them out. You focus on the breath. Try to stay with the breath as much as you can. If you need a meditation word to help, use Buddhu, which means awake. Or you can just do in and out, anything that helps you stay with the breath. Then, when you can stay with the breath, you can drop the meditation word. And the more continually you can stay with the breath, the more you begin to notice where the breath is rough or uneven or too long or too short. You can make adjustments. Try to make your attention on the breath steady and constant, and that will help smooth out the breath. As for whether long breathing feels good or short breathing feels better, that's up to you to decide. You develop not only your mindfulness, i.e., your ability to keep things in mind, but also your powers of judgment as to what's working, what's not working, how to compare. The more you meditate, the more you have to depend on your own powers of judgment, persistence, discernment. And this is what the meditation is for, to teach you how to depend on yourself, how to become your own refuge. We talk about how we take refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, both on the internal and external levels. On the external level, you're inspired by the story of the Buddha, inspired by his teachings, inspired by the Dhamma, and inspired by the example of the noble Sangha. We take these people as examples for how we should live. As I was saying today in class, try to live your life in such a way that if people read about your life, they would be inspired. Not that you're showing off, but just keep that in mind, that you're setting an example for others too, as you act. You see the good example that the Buddha has set, the good teachings he has given us, the good example of the noble Sangha, and one way of expressing gratitude for that is to try to pass on that example. But more important than that is for our own sake, for our own strength. We want to take them as examples so that we can depend on ourselves. As for other people, whether they take you as an example or not, that doesn't lie within your power. There's no way you can force them. And even if they don't take you as an example, your practice is not wasted because you have taken care of your own true responsibility. Now, the question is, how do you take the example of the triple gem and turn it into a refuge inside? That's what the teachings on the 5 strengths are about. 5 steps by which you internalize the qualities of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and make them your own refuge. All 5 steps build on heedfulness. You realize that if you can't depend on yourself, you're living in a dangerous world, because even your act of taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha becomes uncertain. Some days you take them as examples. Other days, you live as if they never existed. Sometimes the change is not from day to day. It can even be from moment to moment. This is scary, so you've got work to do. There are dangers here inside the mind, and there are dangers outside. But the dangers inside the mind are important ones. Keep that thought as your motivation, and then, based on that, develop the 5 strengths. The first is conviction. Conviction in the Buddha's awakening, the 3 knowledges he gained on the night of his awakening, and most importantly, the knowledge he gained about karma. That actions have results, and that the results depend on the intentions inspiring the action and the skill with which you carry it out. And you really do have the choice. You have the choice to change the way you're acting. You've got to have that conviction, that you have it within you. If you see that you're doing something unskillful, you can figure out how to change. It's a possibility, which means that you're also convinced that you've got it within you to carry it through. If you don't have that conviction in yourself in addition to the conviction in the Buddha, the practice is not going to work. You run up against an obstacle and you just run away. As Ajahn Lee said, it's like digging down into the ground to find the gold there, but first you run into a big rock. Some people, when they hit the rock, just throw away their shovels and run off. But if you're convinced that the gold is there and you can find it, you'll be able to find some way of getting through the rock or around it. Years back when we were getting ready to build the chetty at Wat Dhammasathi, we had to bring in some people to put some dynamite in the rock in the mountain. They had no fancy equipment, just a spike and a hammer. That was it. They would tap, tap, tap lightly on the rock, and then turn the spike a bit, and then tap, tap, tap. And I kept thinking to myself, these people will never get anywhere into the rock. But sure enough, I came back 2 hours later and they had gotten a couple of feet into the rock. Just tap, tap, tap. It was the consistency of their effort that got them through the rock, along with their conviction. They had seen in the past that it had worked, so they just kept at it. So, you're going to need that kind of conviction. It may seem that not much is changing from day to day, but over time, you get deeper and deeper through the rock until finally there is gold on the other side. So conviction is what gives you a sense that your own actions are important. And if you have any unskillful qualities, you have the ability to change that. Building on that conviction is persistence, the effort to develop what's skillful and abandon what's not. But it's more than just effort. As the Buddha said, an important part of right effort is generating desire, your motivation. You have to keep reminding yourself why you want to do this. You're not doing this because somebody else tells you. You're nobody's servant. This is your own choice. And you choose it not because you can't do anything else, but because it's inherently good. That was another one of the questions that came up in Brazil. I was asked, so why did you ordain? What went wrong in your life? And all the monks laughed. As I answered, it was something that went very right. I found a path that I could really give my whole heart to. And so, whatever motivation keeps you on the path, try to develop that. Goodwill is an important one. Goodwill is a strength that you can generate from within. It's your protection. It can protect you from yourself, and it can often protect you from other people. If you're radiating goodwill, people feel less threatened by you. At the same time, you're less of a threat to yourself. You're much less likely to do harmful things. You want to remind yourself, okay, I want to act in a way that harms nobody. And it is possible, and it warms your heart. That gives you energy for the practice. You can motivate yourself with heedfulness. You can motivate yourself with a sense of pride that you don't want to stoop to anything low, that you want to do something noble with your life. That's a perfectly legitimate motivation. There is also a sense of shame that comes with that pride, that you would be ashamed to even think about doing something beneath you, so you let it go. This means that persistence is not just chipping away. It's also giving yourself the juice you need to keep going, that you're doing it because it's good and you want to do it. And then, building on this persistence, you develop the other three strengths, beginning with mindfulness, the ability to keep something in mind. In this case, you keep in mind all the instructions you've received and the lessons you've learned from your own practice that are helpful for whatever particular step of the practice you're doing at that point. For instance, as you're sitting here meditating, you don't have to think about generosity or virtue too much, except when you find that it gives you strength. Your sole concern right now is to remember that you want to be with the breath, and you keep reminding yourself that you want to stay here. Together with mindfulness, there's alertness. You watch to make sure that you really are doing this. This is a strength because it keeps you from wandering off and losing your focus. And as you focus in on the breath, you find that your steady focus does change the quality of the breath along with the quality of your experience of the body. If it's skillful, it gives rise to a greater sense of well-being. This is how mindfulness begins to shade into the next strength, which is concentration. You stay consistently focused with the breath. To define concentration, the Buddha uses the word ekaggata, which can be translated as being one-pointed, but also can mean having one gathering place. In other places, he describes concentration as whole-body awareness, so it's more likely that in this case, it means that everything in the mind is gathered around one topic: the sense of the body, the sense of the breath as you breathe in and out, and a sense of the more subtle levels of breath energy that course through the body. You learn to develop a sense of well-being, a sense of refreshment with the breath that fills the whole body. This refreshment, when you gain it, really helps with your conviction and your persistence. It's not the case that, as you develop these strengths, you develop one and then drop it and then go on to the next, or that only the first one helps the second one, which helps the third one. They all help one another. Concentration, in particular, helps with your conviction, your persistence, and your mindfulness. As the Buddha says, mindfulness doesn't become pure until the fourth jhana, which is a fairly advanced stage in concentration. So as you're focusing here on the breath, once there is a sense of ease, think of that ease spreading through different parts of the body. In the beginning, it may not go everywhere, but allow it to flow wherever it can flow easily. And in the same way that allowing water into a channel widens the channel as more and more water goes through, you find that the more the breath runs through the body, the breath energy channels widen and grow more inclusive, spreading more and more to the body as a whole. As you're doing this form of evaluation, you develop the final strength, which is discernment. You see what's working, what's not working. It's not just on the basis of what you've heard, it's on the basis of what you're actually doing. As you learn to adjust things, you begin to see which ways of breathing are more pleasurable, which ways of breathing help you stay with the breath more easily, which ways of focusing the mind and where you focus the mind have the best impact. As you see that connection between cause and effect, that's the beginning of discernment. Then you take that insight and start applying it to other areas where you're causing suffering. You begin to have a place where you can stand here in the concentration so that you can step back from the other ways of your mind and observe them more objectively. This particular habit is not useful. I've got to change. Other people seem to be doing better here. Can I watch their example without feeling jealous or lessened by the fact that they are more skillful than I am? As Ajahn Lee said, his attitude when going to a new place was to look to see what they were doing well that he hadn't done well yet and to learn from them. But if there was some area where he knew more than they did, he would be happy to share his knowledge. But the first point is really important, especially when you're on the path. You want to see, what do other people do more skillfully than me? Can I learn from their example? And as you develop your other strengths, you feel confident that you can. So it's through these 5 strengths that you turn yourself into your own refuge. You take the example of the Buddha, and it becomes the example for your own life. So instead of having to depend on someone from outside, you've got the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha inside, where it really counts. Then, as you make yourself a refuge like this, you find that you can be an external refuge to others. That's how the gift of refuge gets passed on.